History of the Strait of Hormuz. Tonight's story is a quiet journey through history, made for you to simply listen to as you drift off to sleep. The Strait of Hormuz is well known for being one of the world's most important maritime passages and a vital route for global energy shipments. But tonight, we'll take a deeper look at its story. First, turn the volume down a little. Then simply lie back, close your eyes, and make yourself comfortable. There is no need to follow every word. Just let the story drift quietly in the background. And if you fall asleep along the way, that is perfectly fine. And now, let tonight's story slowly begin. At first glance, the Strait of Hormuz may not seem like a place large enough to carry the weight that history has placed upon it. On a map of the world, it appears as only a narrow opening. To one side lies the Persian Gulf. To the other lies the Gulf of Oman, which opens toward the Arabian Sea and then into the vast Indian Ocean. Along the northern shore is Iran. Along much of the southern side is the Musandam Peninsula, a mountainous part of Oman reaching northward toward the Iranian coast. Between these two shores lies the waterway known as the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, the distance from one shore to the other is only about 24 miles, or around 39 kilometers. That may sound fairly wide when imagined from land, but in the language of oceans, 24 miles is remarkably narrow. And the space used by the largest commercial ships is narrower still. Modern vessels normally follow carefully organized traffic lanes. Ships entering the Persian Gulf travel through one lane, ships leaving travel through another. A separation zone lies between them. Each of the main lanes is only about 2 nautical miles wide. Through those relatively narrow corridors pass some of the largest moving objects ever built: oil tankers, liquefied natural gas carriers, container ships, bulk carriers, naval vessels, fishing boats, and smaller traditional craft that have traveled the waters of the Gulf for generations. Day after day, the ships continue moving. Some have sailed thousands of miles before reaching the strait. Others have only recently departed from ports inside the Persian Gulf. Their destinations are scattered across the world: India, China, Japan, South Korea, Europe, Africa, and many other places. Yet for a ship leaving the Persian Gulf by sea, there is essentially one natural doorway to the open ocean. That doorway is Hormuz. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is so often described as a maritime choke point. The word may sound dramatic, but the idea is simple. A choke point is a narrow place through which a great amount of traffic must pass. A bridge across a wide river can become a choke point. a narrow mountain pass can become one, and a strait connecting two much larger bodies of water can become a choke point on a global scale. Hormuz is one of the clearest examples. Yet the history of Hormuz did not begin with oil. It did not begin with the modern nations surrounding the Persian Gulf. It did not begin with the Portuguese ships that arrived during the age of European oceanic expansion. And it did not begin when Europeans first placed the name Hormuz on their maps. Its story is far older. Before there were cities here, before there were ports, before there were kingdoms, and long before there were ships large enough to carry millions of barrels of oil, the first forces creating the Strait of Hormuz were moving slowly beneath the surface of the earth. To understand why a narrow passage exists here at all, we have to travel backward not thousands of years, but millions. The landscape around Hormuz is the result of one of the great geological movements of our planet. To the south lies the Arabian Tectonic Plate. To the north lies the Eurasian Plate. For millions of years, Arabia has been moving slowly northward. The movement is almost impossible to notice during a human lifetime, only a small distance each year. But the Earth has an enormous amount of time, and given millions upon millions of years, even tiny movements can raise mountains, bend layers of rock, close ancient seas, and completely reshape the surface of continents. Long ago, the region between Arabia and Eurasia was associated with the ancient Tethys Ocean. As the Arabian Plate continued moving northward, the distance between Arabia and Eurasia gradually became smaller. Eventually, the enormous masses of continental crust began to collide. A continental collision does not resemble a collision between two cars. There is no single moment when everything suddenly stops. Instead, pressure continues over millions of years. Rock bends, rock breaks, layers are folded, the crust becomes thicker. Some regions rise upward, others bend downward. One of the most spectacular results of this slow collision is the Zagros Mountains of Iran. The Zagros extend for hundreds of miles. Their long, folded ridges are visible clearly from the air. Some appear almost like waves that have somehow become frozen in stone. These mountains record immense geological forces. On the opposite side of the strait, the Musandam Peninsula tells another part of the same story. Musandam has one of the most dramatic landscapes in Arabia. Bare mountains rise steeply from the sea. Deep inlets cut between dark, rocky cliffs. From a distance, these narrow inlets may resemble the fjords of northern Europe, although their geological history is very different. Oman is also famous among geologists because of its extraordinary exposures of ophiolite. Ophiolite is a portion of ancient oceanic crust and upper mantle that has been pushed on to continental land. Normally, rocks from such deep parts of the earth remain hidden beneath oceans or buried beneath other formations. But in Oman, geological processes lifted enormous sections into positions where they can be seen and studied at the surface. In a sense, part of an ancient ocean floor was carried upward into the mountains. The geological collision also helped shape the low basin that became the Persian Gulf. During the last ice age, global sea levels were far lower than they are today. Around 20,000 years ago, huge quantities of water were trapped inside continental ice sheets. Args now covered by the Persian Gulf were much more exposed. The coastline looked very different. River systems associated with Mesopotamia extended much farther southeast. Then the climate warmed. Ice melted. Global sea level rose. Over thousands of years, seawater entered the low basin. The modern Persian Gulf gradually took shape. Water also flooded valleys in the Musandam region, contributing to the dramatic coastal scenery seen today. So the narrow sea passage of Hormuz was not created by a single event. It emerged from an extraordinary combination of processes. Continents moving, mountains rising, the Earth's crust bending, ancient ocean rocks being lifted, ice sheets melting, sea levels rising, and valleys slowly disappearing beneath seawater. There is an especially interesting connection between the geological history of Hormuz and its modern importance. The same broad geological forces that helped form the landscape also contributed to the conditions that created the enormous petroleum and natural gas reserves surrounding the Persian Gulf. For hundreds of millions of years, sediment accumulated in ancient shallow seas. Organic material was buried. Heat and pressure gradually transformed parts of that material. Later folding of the rock created underground structures in which oil and gas could become trapped. So, over immense stretches of geological time, two important things developed in the same general region: huge underground energy resources and a narrow maritime gateway connecting those resources to the open ocean. Millions of years later, those two geological facts would become connected by human trade. Of course, none of this was known to the earliest sailors. They knew nothing about tectonic plates. They did not imagine ancient oceans buried beneath mountain ranges. They did not understand petroleum geology. They saw only what human eyes could see: mountains, islands, currents, wind, reefs, shallow water, and the changing coastline. Over generations, sailors learned these waters, and slowly the Strait of Hormuz became part of another great story, the story of trade. Long before written histories described Hormuz in detail, the Persian Gulf was already connecting communities. The Gulf was not simply a body of water separating civilizations. It was also a road made of water. To the northwest lay Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers supported some of the world's earliest cities. To the north and northeast lay the Iranian plateau. To the southwest stretched Arabia. Beyond the entrance of the Gulf lay the Arabian Sea, and farther east lay the coast of India. These regions were connected earlier than we sometimes imagine. Archaeological evidence shows ancient movement of goods around the Persian Gulf and between Mesopotamia and the wider Indian Ocean world. Boats could move materials over distances that were extremely difficult to cross by land. Goods traveled. But goods were never the only things that traveled. People moved as well. And when people traveled, they carried languages, customs, technologies, religious beliefs, stories, and knowledge. The waters around Hormuz became part of these networks. For an ancient ship approaching the Persian Gulf from the Arabian Sea, the landscape would gradually change. The open sea narrowed. Mountainous coasts appeared. Islands became important landmarks. The direction and behavior of currents changed. Experienced sailors learned which places were dangerous. They learned where the water was deep enough. They learned where shelter could be found. They learned the winds. They watched the stars. They memorized coastlines. Centuries before modern navigation equipment, maritime knowledge was carried in human memory. One of the best-known surviving descriptions of ancient Indian Ocean trade is the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Written during the 1st century of the Common Era, the text described routes, ports, products, and geographical landmarks used by sailors and merchants. Its author described the entrance to the Persian Gulf and the mountainous landscapes around it. The modern name Strait of Hormuz was not yet being used in exactly the way we recognize today, but the passage itself was already known. That is an important distinction. A place may matter for centuries before its modern name becomes common on maps. Sailors know places through landmarks. Merchants know ports through markets. Local populations use names that distant mapmakers may never hear, and early geographers often cared more about important settlements than about naming every narrow stretch of water between them. Classical geographers also tried to describe the Persian Gulf. Writers such as Ptolemy placed coasts and ports into larger geographical systems. Their maps were imperfect. Precise longitude was extremely difficult to calculate. Distances could be distorted. Coastlines sometimes appeared in unfamiliar shapes. Yet these maps still tell us something important. The Persian Gulf belonged to a known commercial world. People around the Gulf were not isolated. They traded toward India, toward Arabia, toward the Mediterranean world, toward inland Asia. And over the following centuries, those maritime networks became even larger. After the rise of Islam in the 7th century, cities of the Islamic world became central to enormous networks of trade. The Persian Gulf was one part of a much wider commercial system linking the Middle East with East Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and China. Muslim merchants and sailors developed sophisticated knowledge of the Indian Ocean. One of the most important natural forces shaping their voyages was the monsoon. The monsoon winds change direction with the seasons. For part of the year, winds favor travel in one broad direction. Months later, they change and help ships return. This created a rhythm for Indian Ocean trade. Merchants planned voyages around the winds. A ship sailing from Arabia or the Persian Gulf toward India might arrive during one season and remain there until the winds became favorable for the return journey. That meant ports were not merely places where cargo briefly changed hands. They became places where foreigners stayed, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, sometimes forever. Merchant communities developed far from their regions of origin. Languages mixed. Religious communities appeared in distant ports. Commercial partnerships connected people who came from very different societies. The Indian Ocean became one of history's great zones of cultural exchange. And somewhere near the meeting point of the Persian Gulf and the open sea, Hormuz began to rise. The earliest important settlement, known as Hormuz, was not located on the island that carries the name today. The older city stood on the mainland coast of Persia. By around the 10th century, it had developed into an important trading center. Its location allowed it to connect maritime commerce with caravan routes leading inland toward regions such as Kerman and Sistan. Goods arrived from the interior. Other goods arrived by ship. Markets connected them. A successful trading city did not need to produce all of the commodities that made it wealthy. Its power came from location. Merchants required places where routes met. They needed markets, warehouses, information, credit, protection, fresh supplies, and access to ships. Hormuz offered these things near one of the most important gateways of the Indian Ocean. Over time, the rulers of Hormuz became increasingly prosperous. The city stood between several commercial worlds. To the east lay India. To the west lay the Gulf and Mesopotamia. To the south lay Arabia and the routes toward Africa. To the north were the interior regions of Persia and Central Asia. The commodities crossing these networks were extraordinarily varied. Indian textiles, spices, pearls, precious stones, metals, dyes, ceramics, dates, grain, timber, and horses. Horses from Persia and Arabia were especially valuable in parts of India. Indian rulers and armies valued imported horses because breeding large numbers of strong war horses could be difficult in some environments. Ships, therefore, carried animals eastward across the Arabian Sea. In the opposite direction came textiles and other valuable goods. Pearls harvested in the Gulf might travel thousands of miles. Chinese ceramics appeared in markets far from China. Spices grown in tropical Asia could eventually reach consumers in the Mediterranean. Very few of these goods necessarily traveled directly from producer to final customer. They passed through many merchants, many ports, many ships. And Hormuz benefited from being one of the places where these routes came together. During the medieval period, the center of Hormuz shifted from the mainland to an island near the entrance of the Gulf. Political instability and military threats played an important role in the move. An island provided protection from armies traveling over land. It was easier to defend. And it stood directly beside the maritime routes that gave Hormuz its wealth. Yet Hormuz Island was not naturally suited to supporting a large, rich city. The landscape was dry. Fresh water was limited. Agriculture could not easily support a major population. Many necessities had to be brought from elsewhere. This created one of the most striking contrasts in the history of Hormuz. The land itself looked barren, but its markets could contain extraordinary wealth. Travelers described a cosmopolitan commercial center. Persians lived and traded there. Arabs arrived. Indian merchants came from across the sea. Africans participated in the wider maritime networks. Central Asian goods reached the city through Persia. Later, Europeans would appear as well. Different languages could be heard in the streets. Different religious communities lived side by side. Ships crowded the harbor. Cargo entered warehouses. Merchants negotiated prices. Officials collected customs duties. Hormuz became, in effect, one of the great exchange points of the Indian Ocean. The rulers of the Kingdom of Hormuz controlled more than one island or port. Their influence extended around important parts of the Gulf entrance. Historians have sometimes described Hormuz as a commercial empire. Its strength did not come primarily from controlling enormous agricultural territories. Instead, it controlled ports and commercial movement. This type of power depended upon geography. If valuable trade had to pass through a small number of convenient routes, controlling those routes could generate enormous revenue. The rulers of Hormuz taxed commerce. Ships paid duties. Merchants paid customs fees. The kingdom could become rich without producing the goods itself. In many ways, this was a very old version of a principle that would remain important for centuries. Control the gateway, influence the trade, and transform geography into political power. By the 15th century, Hormuz had become famous well beyond the Gulf. Travelers who visited the region described its commercial wealth. Its reputation reached Europe at a moment when European kingdoms were becoming increasingly interested in direct access to Asian markets. For centuries, valuable Asian products had reached Europe through long networks of merchants. Spices were especially desirable. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and other products could command high prices in European markets. But European consumers generally did not purchase them directly from producers in Asia. Goods passed through many intermediate traders. Each stage added cost. European rulers and merchants, therefore, dreamed of reaching the markets of the Indian Ocean directly by sea. Portugal became the first European kingdom to establish a regular ocean route around Africa to India. During the 15th century, Portuguese navigators gradually explored farther down the Atlantic coast of Africa. Then, in 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India after sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. The voyage was historic, but it is important to understand what the Portuguese did not discover. They did not discover Indian Ocean trade. The Indian Ocean had been filled with commercial networks for centuries. What Portugal discovered was a new route by which Portuguese ships could enter those existing networks directly from the Atlantic. Once that route was known, Portuguese ambitions grew rapidly. They did not simply want to participate in trade, they wanted to control important parts of it. Portugal faced an obvious problem. The Indian Ocean was enormous. Its coastlines stretched across Africa, Arabia, Persia, India, and Southeast Asia. Portugal itself was a relatively small European kingdom. It could not conquer every major city or occupy every coastline. Portuguese strategists therefore concentrated on certain strategic points: important ports, narrow sea passages, locations where ships naturally had to gather. If they could control a limited number of such places, they hoped to influence trade across a much larger area. Three maritime gateways were especially attractive: the entrance to the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia. Hormuz was therefore one of Portugal's great strategic objectives. Afonso de Albuquerque became one of the main architects of this system. In 1507, Albuquerque arrived in the region and attempted to establish Portuguese power at Hormuz. The first effort did not produce stable control. Resistance and disagreements within his own forces complicated the campaign. But Albuquerque returned. In 1515, the Portuguese successfully established dominance over Hormuz. A fortress was constructed on the island. Its walls still survive. Weathered by centuries of heat, wind, and salt, the ruins are reminders of a period when a small European kingdom attempted to control one of the great gateways of Asian commerce. Portuguese cannon now overlooked waters used by merchants for centuries. The Portuguese developed a maritime licensing system often known as the cartaz. Ships sailing in areas claimed by Portugal could be required to carry official passes. These documents allowed Portuguese authorities to regulate maritime movement and collect revenue. A ship without the required permission might be stopped or seized. Portugal hoped that armed ships and fortified ports could impose a new layer of control over existing commerce. Hormuz became central to this strategy. Ships moving between the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean passed near the Portuguese position. Customs income could be extremely valuable. Indian textiles came through. Spices moved through the wider network. Horses traveled toward India. Pearls left the Gulf. Merchants from many cultures continued to participate in commerce. The arrival of Portugal did not erase the existing trading world. Instead, the Portuguese inserted themselves into it. This is one of the most important points in understanding the history of Hormuz. European powers did not create the commercial importance of the strait. They were attracted to Hormuz precisely because the strait was already commercially important. Portugal simply brought a new type of armed maritime empire into an old trading system. And eventually, other powers challenged it. One of those powers was the Ottoman Empire. During the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire controlled territories across southeastern Europe, Anatolia, Egypt, the Eastern Mediterranean, and much of the Arab Middle East. After conquering Egypt in 1517, the Ottomans inherited strong interests in Red Sea commerce and the routes connecting the Middle East with the Indian Ocean. Portuguese naval power threatened those routes. A long rivalry developed. Ottoman and Portuguese forces competed around Arabia, the Red Sea, the Gulf, and the Western Indian Ocean. The Strait of Hormuz became part of this larger struggle. Ottoman commanders attempted to challenge Portuguese control in the Gulf. Among the most famous was Piri Reis. Today, Piri Reis is often remembered for his surviving world map, but he was also an experienced naval commander. During the early 1550s, Ottoman operations brought forces toward Portuguese positions in the Gulf. Other commanders continued the struggle. Murad Reis, Saidi Ali Reis. Naval battles took place around Oman and the approaches to Hormuz. The Ottomans ultimately failed to drive the Portuguese from their fortified position. Portugal remained at Hormuz. Yet these events reveal how important the strait had become. Lisbon was thousands of miles away. Istanbul was thousands of miles away. Still, both empires considered Hormuz important enough to fight over. The geography of one narrow waterway had become connected to imperial strategy on a continental scale. But a power closer to Hormuz was also becoming stronger: Safavid Persia. The Safavid dynasty established a major Persian empire during the early 16th century. By the late 16th century, Shah Abbas I had emerged as one of its most important rulers. Known as Abbas the Great, he reigned from 1588 until 1629. He strengthened the state, reorganized parts of the military, encouraged commerce, and developed Isfahan into a magnificent imperial capital. Shah Abbas wanted to reduce foreign control over strategically important Persian territories. Portuguese possession of Hormuz was an obvious problem. But removing Portugal was not easy. The Safavids were powerful on land. Portugal's advantage was naval power. An island fortress could not easily be conquered without control of the surrounding sea. The Safavids therefore needed maritime assistance, and they found it in an unexpected place: England. The English East India Company had entered the Indian Ocean trading world. English merchants were competitors of Portugal. They also hoped to strengthen commercial relations with Persia. Persian silk was especially attractive. For a brief period, English and Safavid interests aligned. Shah Abbas wanted the Portuguese removed. The English wanted to weaken a commercial rival. In 1622, they acted together. Safavid forces attacked Portuguese positions. English ships provided naval support. Fighting occurred around Keshem and Hormuz. Eventually, the Portuguese position collapsed. After more than a century of Portuguese dominance, Hormuz was lost. The removal of Portugal did not simply restore the old commercial system. Shah Abbas redirected trade toward a mainland port. That port became known as Bandar Abbas. The name means, in effect, the port of Abbas. Commercial importance shifted away from Hormuz Island. The island never fully recovered the extraordinary position it had enjoyed during the medieval period. Its fortress remained. Its name remained. The strait continued to carry that name. But the great commercial city had been changed forever. There is an interesting historical irony here. Empires struggled to control Hormuz because the island was wealthy. Yet the struggle itself helped move trade away from the island. The gateway remained important, but the center of commerce shifted. Over the following centuries, European competition in the Persian Gulf continued. The Portuguese still held other positions in the wider Indian Ocean. The English expanded their commercial activity. Dutch merchants and naval forces also became involved. Persian rulers attempted to balance foreign interests while maintaining authority over coastal trade. Bandar Abbas became an important mainland port. Ships continued passing through Hormuz. Commerce did not disappear simply because one political system had changed. And another part of the story was quietly evolving at the same time. Maps. The history of cartography provides a fascinating way to observe changing ideas about the Strait of Hormuz. Early geographical works often emphasized cities and coastlines rather than precisely naming the strait. For merchants, a port could be more important than the formal name of the water beside it. Medieval Islamic geographers produced increasingly detailed descriptions of the world. Al-Idrisi, working in the 12th century, combined older geographical knowledge with information collected from travelers and merchants. His work reflected a world tied together by both maritime and overland routes. Later Portuguese cartographers had very practical reasons to map Hormuz carefully. Their ships needed navigational information. Their empire depended on knowledge of ports and coastlines. Maps became tools of commerce and military power. They were not merely illustrations. They could help ships avoid dangers, show the position of islands, identify useful harbors, and support imperial claims. Over time, European maps of the Gulf became more precise. The names varied. Hormuz might appear as Ormus. Sometimes a map emphasized the city or island. Sometimes the entire surrounding Gulf carried a related name. By the 18th and 19th centuries, navigation was becoming increasingly scientific. Methods of measuring longitude improved. Naval surveyors recorded coastal features more systematically. Details, deep soundings became important. hydrographic charts gave sailors increasingly accurate information. A modern chart of Hormuz would have seemed almost magical to an ancient navigator. Yet despite all this technological progress, modern ships still confront the same basic geography. Iran lies to the north, Oman lies to the south, and the ship must pass between them. During the 18th and 19th centuries, British influence in the Persian Gulf increased. Britain's empire in India made the Gulf strategically important. Sea routes connecting Britain, India, and the wider Asian world needed protection. British merchants wanted reliable commercial access. British officials wanted political stability on terms that suited imperial interests. The East India Company became deeply involved in Gulf affairs. Along the Arabian coast, local rulers and maritime communities competed for trade and political influence. British accounts often referred to part of the southern coast as the Pirate Coast. That term reflected British interpretations and interests at the time. The communities of the region had their own political systems, rivalries, and commercial traditions. During the 19th century, Britain used naval power and treaties to create new relationships with several coastal sheikdoms. These territories later became known as the Trucial States. In 1971, most of them would unite to form the United Arab Emirates. Oman developed along a different path. Omani maritime power had once extended far into the Indian Ocean and East Africa. For a period, Zanzibar became closely connected to the Omani ruling dynasty. The Musandam Peninsula remained part of Oman. Its geography is unusual. Musandam is separated from most of Oman by territory belonging to the United Arab Emirates. It is an exclave. Yet this separated mountainous peninsula overlooks one of the most strategically important stretches of water on Earth. Before petroleum transformed the Gulf, another product shaped the lives of many coastal communities: pearls. Natural pearls from the Persian Gulf had been valued since ancient times. The warm, shallow waters provided rich pearl banks. Divers worked from boats during the pearling season. They descended repeatedly into the water. Without modern diving equipment, without oxygen tanks, their work was physically demanding and dangerous. Yet a fine natural pearl could be extremely valuable. Gulf pearls traveled far beyond the region. India was a major market. Persian merchants traded them. Ottoman elites valued them. European jewelry markets eventually consumed them as well. The pearl economy supported complex communities: boat owners, divers, crew members, merchants, financiers, families waiting on shore. Success depended partly on nature, A season might be good or disappointing. A diver might return with many shells, but few valuable pearls. Nevertheless, pearling remained one of the Gulf's most important industries into the early 20th century. Then the economy changed dramatically. Cultured pearls became increasingly successful, particularly through developments in Japan. Natural Gulf pearls lost much of their former market advantage. At almost the same time, another resource was beginning to reshape the region: a dark liquid buried deep beneath the ground: oil. In 1908, commercial quantities of petroleum were discovered at Masjid Suleiman in southwestern Persia. At first, the discovery did not instantly transform the Strait of Hormuz. There were no endless lines of modern supertankers. There were no giant liquefied natural gas carriers. There were no satellite tracking systems following vessels around the world. But historically, the discovery marked the opening of a new age. The 20th century became the age of petroleum. Automobiles spread. Trucks transformed transportation. Aircraft created entirely new industries. Ships increasingly used oil-based fuels. Factories required enormous quantities of energy. Petroleum became the raw material for petrochemicals, plastics, synthetic materials, industrial chemicals, and many other products. As global demand grew, exploration around the Persian Gulf expanded. The region contained some of the largest petroleum reserves ever discovered. Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the lands that would become the United Arab Emirates, and eventually the enormous natural gas resources associated especially with Qatar. The geology that had developed quietly over hundreds of millions of years suddenly became central to the modern global economy. And because so much of the region's energy would travel by sea, the Strait of Hormuz became more important than ever. Pipelines could carry petroleum across land, but ships offered extraordinary flexibility. A tanker could leave a Gulf terminal and travel toward India, or East Asia, or Europe, or another market entirely. As the global petroleum industry expanded, tankers became larger. Eventually, the world created vessels so enormous that their dimensions are difficult to appreciate without seeing them in person. A very large crude carrier may stretch several hundred meters from bow to stern. Standing on its deck can feel almost like standing on a long industrial platform rather than an ordinary ship. When fully loaded, such a vessel carries an enormous amount of petroleum. But size creates limitations. A large tanker cannot stop quickly. It cannot turn sharply. Its captain must plan movements far in advance. And beneath the surface, the ship extends deeply into the water. This depth is called draft. A heavily loaded tanker may have a draft approaching 20 meters or more. That means a ship cannot simply travel anywhere the surface appears open. The shape and depth of the seabed matter. This is especially important in Hormuz. Although the distance between the coasts is several dozen kilometers, ships use carefully defined deep water routes. The traffic separation scheme organizes vessels into lanes. One lane carries ships into the Gulf, the other carries them outward. Between them is a separation zone. Each lane is roughly 2 nautical miles wide. For a person looking at a map, that may sound comfortable. For a tanker hundreds of meters long, surrounded by other shipping and affected by wind, current, visibility, and limited maneuverability, it is a carefully managed passage. The weather also matters. Summer temperatures around the Gulf can become extreme. Dust can fill the atmosphere. Haze may reduce visibility. Fog can occasionally affect navigation. Winds influence sea conditions and port operations. Modern vessels use radar, satellite navigation, electronic charts, automatic identification systems, weather forecasting, and sophisticated communication equipment. These technologies make navigation far safer than it was in the ancient world. Yet the ancient sailors and modern tanker captains still share one basic experience. Both must respect the geography. Both must pass through the same narrow gate. The political landscape around Hormuz changed greatly during the 20th century. European colonial empires weakened after the Second World War. India became independent in 1947. Britain gradually reduced its direct imperial commitments in the Gulf. Kuwait became independent in 1961. Bahrain and Qatar became independent in 1971. The United Arab Emirates was formed that same year. Regional states became increasingly responsible for their own defense and foreign relations. Iran, under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, sought a powerful regional position. Saudi Arabia grew economically and politically stronger. The United States became increasingly involved in Gulf security. At the same time, petroleum exports tied the region ever more closely to the economies of distant countries. The oil crises of the 1970s dramatically demonstrated how sensitive the world economy had become to energy supplies. The 1973 oil crisis did not result from the physical closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Its causes were connected to the Arab-Israeli conflict and decisions made by oil-producing states. But the crisis taught governments an important lesson. Petroleum supply could no longer be treated as a purely commercial issue. Energy had become strategic. Consumers experienced higher prices. Governments worried about shortages. Strategic petroleum reserves became more important. Energy policy and foreign policy became closely linked, and Hormuz received increasing attention. There was also the question of maritime law. At the narrowest part of Hormuz, the territorial seas claimed by Iran and Oman meet. Yet the strait is also used for international navigation. Modern international maritime law developed rules intended to balance the rights of coastal states with the need for passage through important international straits. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, completed in 1982, formalized many principles concerning territorial seas and transit passage. Different governments have sometimes disagreed over specific interpretations. Iran signed the convention, but has not ratified it. The United States has not ratified the convention either, although it accepts many navigation principles as customary international law. These legal questions may sound technical, but in an international strait used by enormous commercial and naval vessels, legal language can have real consequences. How may ships pass? What rules apply to military vessels? How much authority does a coastal state possess? How much freedom does international navigation require? Such questions have remained part of the political background of Hormuz. Most of the time, however, commercial shipping simply continues. A tanker enters. A tanker leaves. A container ship passes. A fishing boat returns home. The routine can continue quietly for years. And then, political events suddenly remind the world how narrow the passage really is. In 1980, war began between Iran and Iraq. The Iran-Iraq War would continue for 8 years. Its causes were complex: boundary disputes, regional rivalry, political fears following Iran's 1979 revolution, competition for influence, and long-standing tensions between the governments. Most of the conflict took place on land, but both countries depended heavily on petroleum. Oil exports brought foreign currency. Oil infrastructure therefore became strategically important. Iraq began attacking shipping associated with Iranian oil exports. Iran responded by targeting vessels connected with Iraq's supporters. By 1984, the maritime campaign had become widely known as the Tanker War. Commercial ships now found themselves operating in a dangerous environment. Tankers were attacked, crews were placed at risk, insurance costs rose. Shipping companies had to evaluate whether voyages remained commercially acceptable. Yet the traffic never simply disappeared. Oil remained too important. Producing countries needed revenue. Impairing countries needed energy. Shipping companies still had incentives to operate, if risks could be managed. This reveals one of the unusual characteristics of maritime choke points. A narrow passage can make trade vulnerable, but the enormous economic value of that trade creates equally enormous pressure to keep the route functioning. Kuwait became increasingly concerned about attacks on its tankers. In 1987, the United States began Operation Earnest Will. Kuwaiti tankers were reflagged under the American flag and escorted by United States naval vessels. Other international forces also became active in protecting shipping. The Gulf became filled not only with commercial ships, but with warships. Mines created another danger. A naval mine is especially unsettling because it may be hidden beneath or on the surface of the water. One does not necessarily know where it is until it is detected or struck. Mine clearing operations became important. In April 1988, the American frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine in the Persian Gulf. The ship was badly damaged. Several days later, the United States carried out Operation Praying Mantis against Iranian naval targets. The engagement became one of the most significant American surface naval battles since the Second World War. The wider Iran-Iraq War ended later in 1988. The tanker war ended with it, but memories of those years remained. Governments had learned how quickly commercial shipping could become part of a regional conflict. Insurance companies understood how political tension translated into financial risk. Navies developed experience protecting merchant vessels, and international observers saw clearly why Hormuz mattered. The following decades repeatedly brought the strait back into international attention. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. The Gulf War followed in 1991. Hormuz remained open, but the conflict demonstrated again how closely Gulf security and global energy markets were connected. Territorial disputes also continued around small islands near the entrance to the strait. Iran controls Abu Musa, Greater Tumb, and Lesser Tumb. The United Arab Emirates disputes Iranian sovereignty over them. The islands are small, but small islands in narrow waterways can have significance far beyond their size. They may affect territorial claims. They may overlook shipping routes. They may host observation or military facilities. On a global map, such islands can be difficult to notice. On a naval chart, they matter greatly. Relations between Iran and the United States remained difficult. At various moments, Iranian officials suggested that the strait might be closed or restricted if Iran faced military attack or extreme economic pressure. American officials repeatedly emphasize the importance of freedom of navigation. Such statements produced dramatic headlines. Yet the economic effect of tension can begin long before any passage is physically blocked. Risk itself costs money. Insurance premiums may rise. Charter rates may rise. Shipping companies may demand additional compensation. Crew concerns may increase. Governments may send warships. Markets may react. A single statement can influence oil prices thousands of miles away. A single shipping incident can cause companies operating hundreds of vessels to reconsider their plans. The water itself may remain calm, but economically, everything around it has changed. In 2019, another period of heightened maritime tension drew attention to the Gulf and Hormuz. Several commercial vessels were attacked or damaged. Tankers were seized during separate incidents. Governments disagreed over responsibility for some events. The disputes became connected to wider tensions involving Iran, the United States, sanctions, and regional politics. International maritime security efforts increased. Once again, Hormuz showed how a small geographical space could become connected to disputes involving countries far beyond its shores. But even during periods of tension, the overwhelming majority of voyages remained ordinary. Ships loaded, ships sailed, ships passed through the strait. Ships reached their destinations, and behind each voyage stood an enormous logistical system. Consider a single tanker preparing to leave the Persian Gulf. The crude oil may have been produced hundreds of kilometers from the terminal. It may have traveled by pipeline to the coast. Storage tanks hold the oil until the vessel is ready. The tanker arrives. Loading begins. Large pumps move petroleum into the ship's cargo tanks. The process is carefully monitored. Eventually, the vessel is ready to depart. But the physical ship is only one part of the transaction. The cargo may already have been sold. Banks may be financing the purchase. Insurance companies cover the vessel and the cargo. A refinery thousands of miles away expects delivery. Traders monitor prices. Port authorities schedule arrivals. Other ships may be waiting for berth space. The tanker begins moving. Its crew checks machinery. Weather forecasts are reviewed. Navigational routes are confirmed. As the vessel approaches Hormuz, traffic becomes more concentrated. Radar displays nearby ships. Electronic navigation systems show the route. Radio communications may coordinate movements. The ship enters the traffic lane. Iran lies to the north. Musandam rises to the south. On a clear day, the mountains can create an extraordinary landscape. Dark rock, bright sky, blue water. A giant industrial vessel moving through scenery shaped over millions of years. After several hours, the passage begins to widen. The ship enters the Gulf of Oman. Beyond lies the Arabian Sea. From here, the routes spread outward, east toward India, farther east toward Southeast Asia, then perhaps through the Strait of Malacca toward China, Japan, or South Korea. Other ships may travel southwest toward the Indian Ocean. Cargo bound for Europe may eventually approach the Red Sea and Suez Canal, depending upon prevailing route conditions. Or it may travel around the Cape of Good Hope. Hormuz, therefore, belongs to a global system of maritime choke points: the Strait of Malacca, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, the Turkish Straits, the Panama Canal, and others. Each concentrates enormous amounts of trade into relatively narrow spaces. But Hormuz possesses a particularly powerful geographical characteristic. For the states located inside the Persian Gulf, there is no alternative natural maritime exit. A ship cannot simply sail around the opposite side of the Gulf. There is only one opening to the ocean. That is why alternative pipelines have attracted so much attention. Saudi Arabia has developed pipeline infrastructure, allowing some oil produced near the Persian Gulf to travel westward toward the Red Sea. The United Arab Emirates built a pipeline allowing oil to reach Fujairah, on the Gulf of Oman side of the Strait of Hormuz. These routes are strategically valuable. Oil transported through them does not have to pass through the strait, but pipeline capacity is limited. It cannot easily replace the total volume of petroleum normally moved through Hormuz. Pipelines also have other limitations. They follow fixed routes. They require pumping stations. They require maintenance. Their capacity cannot simply be expanded overnight. A tanker is more flexible. Once a ship leaves port, its destination may be changed. One tanker can sail to India, another to China, another to Europe. This flexibility is one reason maritime transportation remains central to the petroleum economy. During many recent years, approximately 20 million barrels per day of oil and petroleum products have passed through Hormuz. The exact amount changes. Production changes. Global demand changes. Sanctions change. Trade patterns change. But the overall scale remains extraordinary. Roughly a quarter of the world's seaborne oil trade may pass through this single corridor during a typical recent period. Hormuz is also crucial for liquefied natural gas. Qatar is one of the world's leading LNG exporters. Its gas is cooled to extremely low temperatures until it becomes liquid. The volume becomes far smaller, allowing it to be transported in specially designed ships. Those LNG carriers normally leave the Persian Gulf through Hormuz. Many sail toward Asia. This has made the strait especially important to countries that depend heavily on imported energy. Technographical direction of petroleum trade has changed greatly over time. When people discussed Gulf oil during much of the 20th century, attention often focused on Europe and the United States. Today, most crude oil passing through Hormuz travels toward Asian markets. China, India, Japan, South Korea, and other economies. This reflects the rise of Asia as a center of global industrial production and energy demand. Cities expanded, factories multiplied, road networks grew, vehicle ownership increased, aviation expanded, petrochemical production increased. Millions of households joined modern consumer economies. The ships passing through Hormuz became increasingly connected to everyday life in Asia. A barrel of crude oil does not remain crude oil forever. At a refinery, it may be transformed into many products: gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, petrochemical feedstocks, marketables eventually used in plastics, asphalt, industrial chemicals, lubricants, and many other products. The contents of a tanker moving quietly past Musandam may ultimately be distributed across thousands of kilometers and transformed into products used by millions of people. Oil is not the only important cargo connected to Hormuz. Fertilizer and fertilizer feedstocks also matter. Countries around the Gulf are important producers of ammonia and urea. These substances are crucial to modern agriculture. Natural gas is often used as a major input in fertilizer production. This creates another link between the Strait of Hormuz and global food systems. Imagine that shipping costs rise sharply. Energy becomes more expensive. Natural gas markets tighten. Fertilizer prices rise. A farmer far from the Gulf pays more. Food production costs rise. Consumers eventually see higher prices. The connection may not be obvious. A family purchasing food in a country thousands of miles from Iran or Oman may never think about Hormuz. Yet global trade creates long chains of cause and effect. This is one reason organizations such as the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development pay close attention to maritime choke points. A disruption in one place can spread outward. Energy, shipping, agriculture, food prices, national budgets, household expenses. The economic reach of Hormuz is much wider than the waterway itself. Yet statistics can make us forget something simple. People live beside the strait. For them, Hormuz is not merely a strategic line drawn on a map. Bandar Abbas is a large Iranian port city. Hormuz Island remains inhabited. Keshem Island, much larger, stretches through part of the northern side of the strait. Its communities have long histories connected to fishing and trade. On the southern shore, settlements lie among the mountains of Musandam. Khassab is one of the best known. Fishing boats still move through waters that are simultaneously crossed by enormous tankers. Traditional wooden sailing and trading vessels, broadly known as dhows, remain part of the cultural history of the Gulf and Indian Ocean. For centuries, wooden vessels linked Arabia with Persia, India, and East Africa. They carried food, textiles, timber, dates, fish, pearls, passengers, and countless ordinary goods. Their builders developed knowledge passed from generation to generation. Sailors understood winds and currents. Ports formed cultural bridges. Modern political borders may divide the coastline, but maritime connections around Hormuz are much older than those borders. The name Hormuz itself has an uncertain history. Different scholars have suggested different origins. Some have connected the name with Middle Persian religious terminology associated with Ahura Mazda. Others have proposed local geographical or linguistic origins. European maps used forms such as Ormus. Modern English usually uses Hormuz. Persian commonly uses Hormoz. Names change as they pass from language to language. A sailor says a place name. A foreign traveler hears it. A mapmaker writes an approximation. Another language changes the pronunciation. Centuries later, the exact origin may become difficult to recover. Perhaps that uncertainty is appropriate for such an old crossroads. Hormuz has belonged to too many historical worlds to fit neatly inside one linguistic story. Imagine Hormuz Island during its medieval commercial peak. The sun is bright. The land appears dry and almost inhospitable. Nothing about the natural landscape immediately suggests enormous wealth. Then you approach the harbor. The scene changes. Ships are anchored. Sailors unload cargo. Merchants gather. Indian textiles appear in warehouses. Horses are prepared for transport across the sea. Pearls are examined. Spices are weighed. Precious goods arrive in small packages. Caravans bring products from inland Persia. Travelers bring news from distant ports. One merchant speaks Persian, another Arabic. Another comes from India. A sailor may have recently visited East Africa. The streets carry information from half the known world. Money changes hands. Officials collect duties. The kingdom grows wealthy. Now allow that scene to fade. A century passes. Portuguese ships appear. A fortress rises. Cannon point across the water. Officials demand maritime passes. Another century passes. Safavid soldiers arrive. English ships support them. The Portuguese are forced out. Trade moves toward Bandar Abbas. Another scene fades. European trading companies expand. Naval charts become more precise. British vessels appear. Pearling boats still leave small ports every season. Then steamships arrive. Then oil tankers, radio masts, diesel engines, radar, satellite navigation, electronic charts, and finally, enormous ships tracked almost continuously from space. The technology changes completely, but the coastline remains recognizable. This is one of the strange qualities of historically important geography. The same place can contain many eras at once. A modern tanker captain can pass within sight of a fortress built during the Portuguese maritime empire. Beneath the tanker lies a seabed shaped by geological forces millions of years old. On shore live communities whose maritime traditions stretch back for generations. Above the ship, satellites provide precise navigation. And in financial centers thousands of miles away, traders watch energy prices affected by events in these waters. Ancient history, early modern history, industrial history, digital technology, all occupy the same narrow space. Modern globalization has made Hormuz more important in an unexpected way. Technology makes trade more efficient. Ships become larger. Nungong rigor improves. Ports become faster. Digital systems coordinate cargo. Banks transfer money instantly. Companies can manage global supply chains from offices far from the actual goods. Efficiency encourages concentration. If one route is cheaper than another, more trade uses it. As more trade uses the route, infrastructure develops around it. Then the route becomes even more attractive. Eventually, enormous volumes depend upon a relatively small number of places. Hormuz is one of them. This creates a paradox. Global trade feels less constrained by geography than ever. Information moves instantly. People fly between continents. Companies operate around the world. and yet physical goods remain physical. Oil cannot travel through the internet. Liquefied natural gas cannot be sent by email. A fertilizer shipment still needs a vessel. A vessel still needs enough water beneath its hull. And a vessel leaving the Persian Gulf still needs to pass Hormuz. Geography has not disappeared. The possibility of disruption, therefore, receives enormous attention. A complete long-term closure of Hormuz would be extraordinarily serious. But even smaller disruptions can matter. Ships may slow. Companies may delay departures. Insurers may increase prices. Charter rates may rise. Governments may organize escorts. Energy traders may expect shortages. Oil prices can move before the physical supply of petroleum changes significantly. Expectations themselves become economically powerful. This is important because headlines sometimes use words such as closure very broadly. In reality, several different situations are possible. Traffic may continue normally. Traffic may decline. Some ships may wait. Certain operators may suspend voyages temporarily. Military escorts may increase. Insurance costs may rise, or passage may become physically dangerous. These are not identical conditions. For a calm understanding of Hormuz, it is useful to separate dramatic language from the practical behavior of shipping. History also shows that commercial systems are resilient. The Strait of Hormuz has seen war, imperial rivalry, naval battles, mines, political threats, seizures of ships, sanctions, and periods of intense regional tension. Yet over the long term, traffic repeatedly resumes. There is a powerful economic reason. The producers inside the Gulf want to sell. The consumers outside the Gulf want to buy. Shipping companies want to carry the cargo. Governments want stable energy supplies. Enormous incentives therefore exist to restore normal movement. A choke point concentrates vulnerability, but it also concentrates efforts to protect the route. Could the world simply bypass Hormuz? To some extent, but not completely. Pipelines provide alternatives. Saudi Arabia can send some oil toward the Red Sea. The United Arab Emirates can move some oil to Fujairah outside the strait. Strategic petroleum reserves can temporarily replace interrupted imports. Countries can buy energy from other suppliers. Renewable energy can gradually reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Efficiency improvements can reduce consumption. But these solutions operate at different timescales. A pipeline takes years to plan and construct. A new energy system may take decades. strategic reserves are temporary. Alternative suppliers may not have enough spare capacity. The enormous volumes normally passing through Hormuz cannot simply be redirected overnight. So, despite decades of awareness of the risk, the strait remains central to global trade. This does not mean Hormuz will always carry the same products. History suggests the opposite. 1,000 years ago, no tanker passed here. The wealth of Hormuz came from different goods: textiles, horses, pearls, spices, luxury goods. 500 years ago, Portuguese commanders were interested in customs duties and control of Indian Ocean commerce. 200 years ago, pearl fishing and imperial influence mattered greatly. 100 years ago, petroleum was beginning to transform the region. Today, oil and natural gas dominate strategic discussions. A century from now, perhaps another commodity will become important. Trade changes, technology changes, energy changes, but narrow geographical passages often remain valuable even when the cargo changes. The Strait of Malacca was important before container ships. The Bosporus mattered long before modern oil transportation. Hormuz mattered before petroleum. Geography gives some places unusual historical persistence. And beneath all of this human history, the geology continues. The Arabian Plate is still moving. The collision with Eurasia has not ended. The Zagros Mountains continue to respond to tectonic forces. The landscape changes far too slowly for human beings to notice during an ordinary lifetime. But change continues. Over millions of years, geologists expect the configuration of the region to continue evolving. Some projections suggest that, on a geological timescale of many millions of years, continued continental movement could dramatically alter, or perhaps eventually close, the marine passage. It is almost impossible to imagine. 10 million years. The entire recorded history of human civilization becomes tiny against such a span. The Portuguese fortress is only a few centuries old. The ancient cities of Mesopotamia are only several thousand years old. Modern tankers have existed for hardly any time at all by geological standards. From the perspective of the mountains, empires rise and disappear almost instantly. Perhaps this is one of the quieter ways to think about Hormuz. In modern news, the strait is usually associated with urgency, oil prices, military tension, ships, diplomatic statements, markets, risk. But the physical landscape moves to another rhythm. The mountains do not hurry. The rock beneath them does not respond to daily headlines. tectonic plates move slowly. The sea erodes the coastline slowly. Sediment settles slowly. The earth continues its processes whether human beings are watching or not. The Strait of Hormuz therefore exists at the meeting point of several different kinds of time. Geological time, measured in millions of years. Civilizational time, measured in centuries and millennia. Commercial time, measured in seasons, contracts, and voyages. And the time of a single vessel passing through the strait, measured in hours. All of them exist together. Millions of years ago, continents moved. Thousands of years ago, sailors entered these waters. Medieval merchants made Hormuz wealthy. Portuguese ships arrived. Ottoman admirals challenged them. Safavid forces expelled them. Bandar Abbas grew. Pearl divers descended into the Gulf. Oil transformed the modern economy. Tankers became enormous. Naval conflicts revealed their vulnerability. Satellites began tracking ships. And still the passage remains between the mountains. If you could look down upon the region from far above tonight, the Strait of Hormuz might seem almost insignificant at first. The Arabian Peninsula fills a vast area. Iran stretches northward. The Indian Ocean extends beyond the horizon. The Persian Gulf appears as a relatively small, enclosed sea. Then your view moves closer. The Gulf narrows toward the east. Iran approaches from one side, Musandam from the other. Islands appear, and in the darkness, tiny lights move across the water. Ships, one moving inward, another moving outward. Perhaps a tanker, perhaps an LNG carrier, perhaps a smaller cargo vessel. Along the coast, fishing boats may be returning home. To someone watching from far above, the ships seem small, but each vessel carries its own world, a crew, a cargo, a destination, insurance, schedules. Families waiting for the sailors, factories waiting for fuel, refineries waiting for crude oil, ports waiting for arrival. The ships move quietly. Most nights, nothing dramatic happens, and perhaps that is the most important part of the story. The history of Hormuz contains conflict, but most of its long history is also the history of ordinary movement. Sailors traveling, merchants trading, fishermen working, families crossing local waters, ships entering the Gulf, ships leaving. The strait has been a place of rivalry, because it has been a place of connection. Without trade, there would have been much less reason for empires to compete over it. Without movement, the narrow passage would simply have been another stretch of sea. Its strategic importance grew from its usefulness. Its conflicts grew from its connections. Long ago, sailors approaching Hormuz watched natural landmarks. Mountains guided them. Stars helped them navigate at night. Wind determined speed. Currents influenced direction. Experienced sailors remembered dangerous rocks and shallow water. Knowledge passed from one navigator to another. News traveled slowly. A ship might disappear beyond the horizon and remain unheard from for months. Today, the navigator's world is filled with technology. Electronic maps glow on screens. Satellite signals provide position. Radar detects ships in darkness. Automatic systems exchange information. Weather forecasts arrive instantly. Companies track their vessels from thousands of miles away. But outside the windows of the bridge, the ancient landscape remains. Mountains, sea, islands, and a narrow gateway ahead. On Hormuz Island, the old Portuguese fortress stands quietly. Its walls no longer decide which ships may enter the Persian Gulf. No Portuguese official waits for maritime licenses. No Ottoman fleet approaches to challenge the fort. No Safavid army prepares an assault. Those political worlds are gone. The kingdom of Hormuz is gone. The Portuguese Asian Empire is gone. The Safavid Empire is gone. The East India Company is gone. The British imperial order that shaped much of the 19th century Gulf is gone. The pearl industry that once supported coastal communities has changed almost beyond recognition. And someday, perhaps, even the petroleum economy that defines the modern strait will become another historical era. Everything changes, yet the narrow passage remains. That may be the simplest lesson in the long history of Hormuz. Political power is temporary, economic systems change. The goods people value change.
Technology changes. Maps change. Borders change. But geography can influence human choices for a very long time. A narrow channel can outlive kingdoms. It can outlive empires. It can outlive whole systems of trade. And now, as the story begins to become quieter, there is no need to remember every date. You do not need to remember the width of the shipping lanes. You do not need to remember every ruler, every admiral, every island, every battle. You may have forgotten many of them already. That is perfectly fine. Perhaps simply keep one image: a narrow stretch of blue water. Iran to the north, the mountains of Musandam to the south, small islands resting between them, and a line of ships moving slowly across the sea. Behind those ships are thousands of years of human history. Ancient sailors, medieval merchants, pearl divers, map makers, Portuguese soldiers, Persian rulers, Ottoman admirals, British traders, modern tanker crews, all looking toward the same waters. And beneath the water, deeper than any ship can see, the rocks continue their slow movement. Continents still press against one another. Mountains continue to rise by tiny amounts. The sea continues to shape the shore. The earth does not notice our schedules. The mountains do not know the price of oil. The sea does not understand political borders. Water moves with tides and currents. Night settles over the coast. The ships continue onward. And the Strait of Hormuz remains what it has been for so much of human history, a narrow passage between larger worlds, a gateway between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean, a place of competition, but also a place of connection, a place where journeys meet and where journeys continue. Perhaps somewhere tonight, a large ship is leaving the Persian Gulf. Its engines turn steadily. Its wake stretches behind it. The lights of the coast grow more distant. The mountains of Musandam slowly move behind the ship. The water ahead becomes wider. The Gulf of Oman opens toward the Arabian Sea, and beyond that lies the enormous Indian Ocean. The crew knows its destination, but for us, the destination does not matter. We can simply watch the imagined ship move away, slowly, quietly, farther into the night. There is nowhere you need to go. There is nothing more you need to follow. The names and dates can drift away now. The old fortress will remain on Hormuz Island. The mountains will remain beside the water. The sea will continue moving. The ships will continue their passage. And the long history of Hormuz will still be there tomorrow, quietly waiting beside the sea.